In this lecture, we're going to examine some more characteristics of the markets for labor, and in particular, we're going to focus on earnings and wages. So in this lecture, we're going to cover why some jobs earn more than other jobs. We're going to talk about some different reasons, and then we're going to talk about why wages are sometimes above their equilibrium values. And in the next lecture, we'll talk about the economic analysis of discrimination. So just a kind of connection between what we were talking about before and what we're talking about now. In the last section, we talked about how in competitive markets, workers earn a wage that's equal to the value of their marginal product. So if a firm hires one more worker, the additional revenue that that worker would bring in should be equal to their wage in the market in competitive markets. And what are some factors that might affect productivity and wages? So I'm sure all of you know that there's a wide dispersion of earnings in the U.S. economy, but just a quick summary of just how large that distribution can be. This chart shows in 2013 weekly earnings kind of for the average or the median worker in different employment categories. So you can see that chief executives earn on average about $2,000 per week, and on the other end of the distribution, waiters and waitresses earn $413 per week. So that is a very, very large difference between these two occupations. So you can also see some difference of the earnings of men and women in these different categories. So if you just, again, look at chief executives, men earn about $400 more per week than women do. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next lecture when we talk about discrimination. But you can see that there are gender wage gaps in almost all of the different employment categories that we're just covering in this chart. And if this is something you're interested in, economists have done a lot of work in trying to identify the reasons for the gender gap, and you can learn about some of these in more advanced economic classes, in particular labor economics. So why might some jobs earn more than other jobs? Well, the first reason is something called compensating differentials, and this actually goes all the way back to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, published back in 1776. So compensating differentials are differences in wages that come about because of differences in characteristics of different jobs. So these characteristics might include unpleasantness, how difficult the job is, how safe the job is, how prestigious the job is. So some examples is that coal miners and firefighters are paid more than other workers of similar skills because these jobs are more dangerous. Night shift workers are paid more than day shift workers because, all else equal, people do not want to work nights. Ability, effort, and sometimes just flat out luck can also affect wages. So if someone makes a new discovery and a new invention, then that person can earn a significant amount of money, and there may have been a lot of other people working towards the same goal, and they did not have the breakthrough, so then there's just a bit of luck that's involved in wages. And it's kind of hard to quantify this because it's very difficult to try and measure the ability and effort and luck. So all of these things are important. Economists haven't focused on it as much. So just another case study about the differences that can happen between wages. One thing economists have studied is the relationship between a person's looks and their wages. And an economist, Dan Hammermish, who is at the University of Texas, has written a number of very influential papers on this, and what he's found is on average, people who are more attractive earn about 5% more than people who are average looking. And the benefits to beauty, incidentally, do not just happen in the labor market. People who are better looking have many other advantages as well. They get lower rates on loans, and they get preferential treatment in a number of other areas as well. So why might this happen in the labor market? Well, maybe it's that good looks matter for productivity. So, for example, if you think about waiters and waitresses, a good-looking waiter and waitress may be better at selling food. The same thing might be true for salespeople, especially in clothing stores. So maybe good looks actually affects the value of the marginal product of the worker, in which case that would affect their wages. Maybe good looks are indirectly related to ability. So if a worker takes the time to project an attractive front, then that could signal to employers that this person is of higher ability. So if the person is thinner, then maybe that means that they take time out of their day to go to the gym. Maybe this could be something that's going on. Or it could just be discrimination. Maybe people who are better looking are not higher quality workers, and maybe it's just that better looking people are paid higher wages just because of discrimination. Another reason that people may earn much higher wages than other people is something called the superstar phenomenon. So I'm sure you all know that superstars in music or sports earn a lot of money. And where this gets interesting is, why do the best athletes and the best singers get paid so much more than the best plumbers or the best carpenters? Well, this might happen in a market that has two characteristics. So every consumer in the market wants to enjoy the good that is supplied by the best producers. So think about music and sports. This is obviously true. Everyone likes to see the best singers perform. Everyone wants to watch the best athletes perform. So that's thing one. Thing two is the good is produced in such a way that it can be distributed to everyone at once at a low cost. So in music, CDs can be provided to everyone, and now in the past 5 or 6 years, downloading and digital music have become very, very popular. So it's very easy for Beyonce to get her music out to a wide number of people. Same thing with athletes. So television allows everyone to watch the best sports people play. And in these markets with these characteristics, that means that the value of the marginal product of these superstars is way, way higher than the value of the marginal product of average athletes. And this is what makes superstars different from the best producers in other fields. Another reason that some people get paid much higher wages is a term called human capital. So human capital is the amount of knowledge and know-how that you have accumulated through investing in ways to make yourself smarter and more capable. So education and on-the-job training. And when you invest in education and training, it affects your productivity, and thus it affects your your wages. So just some statistics to back this up. Here is the median weekly earnings for people with different amounts of education. So people with more education accumulate more human capital. So you can see that people with advanced degrees get paid 3 times as much as people with less than a high school degree on average. And this has been increasing over time. So if we look at the gap between college educated and non-college educated workers, back in 1980, there was about a 44% gap for men, a 35% gap for women. In 2012, that gap had increased to 70% for men and almost 65% for women. So why might human capital be increasingly important in our economy? Well, one might be international trade. So what's happened is, since we have started to trade more with other countries, we have started to focus our economy around high human capital occupations. And a lot of the lower human capital occupations, think about blue-collar jobs, those have become less valuable as a lot of that has gone overseas. The other option could be something called skill-biased technological change. So this hypothesis says that as computers and robots have become more prevalent in our production processes, some jobs have been substitutes for computerization. Other jobs have been complementary. So what do I mean by that? So what I mean by that is, let's say we split jobs into different job characteristics. So we're going to split jobs into whether they are routine and whether they're non-routine, and we're going to also split jobs into whether they are kind of manual in nature or whether they are kind of information processing in nature. So you can see that here we have different possible jobs that people are doing, and they are split up into these different categories. So here we can focus on information processing and cognitive jobs. So one that is routine might be bookkeeping and filing, and one that is not routine, that's information processing, might be medical diagnosis, legal writing, persuading or selling, or actually my job, engaging in research. If you looked at jobs that are visual or manual, non-routine tasks might be janitorial services, truck driving. Ones that are routine might be working on an assembly line, and so on and so forth. So how might computers affect these different kind of 4 categories of jobs? Well, let's start with routine jobs that are visual or manual in nature. So here a computer makes substitution away from humans doing these jobs to machines doing these jobs feasible. So we would expect to see that as computers become more prominent, these jobs, some of them would be turned over to computers. At least so far in non-routine tasks, computers don't really seem to have an effect on these jobs at all. So janitorial services, can't really think about how robots or computers have really affected janitorial services. Same thing with truck driving. What about information processing? Well, routine tasks that are information processing in nature, computers have a strong substitutable relationship. So I would expect that a lot of these jobs have been replaced by computers. Non-routine jobs, I would expect the opposite. So here I would expect that computers would make these jobs even more valuable. All right, so let's see some evidence for these different hypotheses. So this chart plots how prevalent these different types of jobs have been in our economy over the past like 40 years. So here you can see, let's look at routine cognitive skills jobs. These are the jobs that I expect that computers would really replace. So let's see. So they start going up, and then right when computers start to become prevalent, these jobs just become much, much rarer. So computers seem to have really replaced a lot of these jobs. How about the cognitive jobs that are not routine? These are the ones that computers should make much more productive. So these jobs, you can see, just have an opposite pattern as computers become more prevalent, starting in the 80s. These jobs really take off. Okay, so what else might be going on with education? Well, maybe education doesn't really increase human capital. Maybe education is all about signaling. So firms are always looking for high ability workers, and sometimes it's difficult to tell who is a high ability worker and who is not. So in these cases, college degrees can serve as a signal because they are difficult to obtain. And since they're difficult to obtain, high ability people are the ones that will go get a college degree. Thus, firms can use a college degree to screen and only hire workers that are high ability. And this is true even if the education itself has no impact on productivity or skills. So, why might we see above equilibrium wages? So these are wages that are not at the equilibrium levels. Well, the first one is minimum wage laws. So minimum wage laws have, been a big policy debate over, a number of years now. So this goes back to our first discussions of the supply and demand diagram. You can think of minimum wages as a price floor. So if you place a price floor above the equilibrium wage, then that will lead to a higher price. Just like price floors also suggest, we find a lot of evidence that minimum wages lead to less employment. The effect doesn't seem to be that large, but we do find that it is there. Unions can also lead to higher equilibrium wages. So you can think of a union as combining a bunch of different workers together into something that looks more like a monopoly. So we just finished talking about the effects of monopolies, and we saw that when we have a monopoly compared to a competitive environment, we see prices that are higher and quantity traded that is less. So we see the same thing with unions. So unions lead to higher wages, but also leads to less employment. Lastly, we could see something called efficiency wages. So efficiency wages are above equilibrium wages voluntarily paid by firms to increase worker productivity. So if firms have issues with kind of negative labor market outcomes such as high worker turnover, then they may pay higher wages than the equilibrium suggests to decrease these negative outcomes. So decrease turnover, increase worker effort, or attract higher quality job applicants.